Hi, how are you doing? This is another part of my series where I am editing my own works. And this one is called The Tale of Wrenh Bird. This is a children's storybook that I intend on actually publishing. And it is about a little bird who gets her feelings very badly hurt. This story was inspired by one of my children, and I wanted to share with you all as I go through and edit it. Hopefully I'll be able to, I would really love to query this one. I have no idea if that's something that I'll be able to do. While I do think of myself as a decent enough illustrator, I don't think that I have the capacity to illustrate this one in the way I want it to be. I certainly want something that's more of a watercolor look and feel to it. Something that can be, I'm trying to think of an equivalent to it, but watercolor is all I can think of. So let's go through this together, and we're going to edit it, and we're going to see what needs to be changed, what initially needs to be altered, and then I'm actually going to send this one to a friend of mine and have them look through it, read through it, and give me their feedback, and then hopefully go through that feedback with you. So, to start with, Wren Bird was a bird. A Carolina wren, to be exact, and Wren Bird loved to sing. When Wren Bird sang, Wren Bird sang all of the time, from the moment she woke up in her nest to the moment she fell asleep at night. She sang ballads and arias and even sang duets all by herself, making sure to do both parts as best as she could. She sang by herself and around others, and all through the winter. And when spring came, what she loved most was to sing. And when spring came, what she loved most was to sing at her favorite pond where all the birds flying home for winter could gather to rest. One early spring day, Wren Bird found a lovely spot by the pond so she could sing her newest song, one like no one had ever heard before. She wrote it all by herself and was very proud. She took a deep breath, opened her mouth, sang two notes of her brand new song, and suddenly heard a voice in the reeds. "What is that awful racket?" A wise-looking old redbird came down and sat by Wren Bird on her reed, his tufted red head all stippled with gray pen feathers. He looks at her rather grumpy, his eyes narrowed and his nose in the air. Okay, so here's the first thing. Looks, I flip-flopped out of tense there. So a wise-looking old bird came down. He looked at her, rather grumpy, his eyes narrowed and his nose in the air. "Don't tell me that was you." Wrenbird felt embarrassed, and she shuffled back and forth on the reed as though she didn't know whether to stay or run away. So here's one point that I wanted to make. In an adult book, or even a young adult book, you wouldn't say necessarily that someone felt embarrassed. You might imply it through their actions and their words. But when you're doing a picture book, kids that this age group is focused on aren't going to completely have words to put to the emotions they're feelings. So while they may understand that shuffling back and forth is a bodily function that someone does, they may not necessarily equate it with feeling embarrassed. So when you're doing a children's picture book, it is good to just say things very blatantly and not leave too much room in between the lines for kids to learn. I'm not saying to not give enough credit to your audience, but it is important to remember that kids need things to be blatantly stated in order for them to pick it up when they're anywhere from 3 to 6 years old. Wrenbird felt embarrassed, and she shuffled back and forth on the reed as though she didn't know whether to stay or run away. "Yes, that was me," she said, trying not to cry. "It's my newest song." "And what makes you think anyone here would want to listen to that?" he asked, puffing out his big red chest. So, again, kids, they're gonna already wonder who is he. So we're gonna say Redbird asked, puffing out his big red chest. Wren Bird became very shy. No one had ever spoken to her the way the redbird was speaking. It made her insides rumble and her chest feel tight. She said, "I sing by the pond every day, and no one has ever seemed to mind." "I highly doubt that," the old redbird huffed, hopping down to the pond shore and calling attention to himself. Okay, so here Microsoft is saying put shore, comma, and I'm going to agree with it. "Excuse me, is it true that no one here has anything to say about this wren and her incessant singing?" No one at the pond said anything right away. Wrenbird's friends were all there. Mr. Toadstool and Miss Chipmunk, and the Beaver twins, and the Otter children, not to mention the migrating ducks that were stopped there on their way home for the spring, some of whom Wrenbird had sung for last year, too. The old redbird bristled his feathers, old red feathers falling out of his wings, and said, "Okay, so that's repetitive. The old redbird bristled his feathers, old red feathers falling out of his wings." So we're just going to say nothing on that. It's not really necessary. I don't think that an illustrator would be able to really illustrate that well anyway, and even if they did, that could just be something that they add in there. See, the beauty with a children's book, when you're doing a picture book, is your illustrator is going to add to it in a way that you wouldn't have anticipated. It is their job to bring the image to life, and they're probably going to add in some nuances of their own that adds to the story in a way that words just can't quite convey, especially at this age level. So the old redbird bristled his feathers and said, "So am I to believe that every single one of you enjoys the noise this wren makes? I highly doubt all of you do. I certainly don't, and I don't think she should be allowed to sing at this pond where there are so many of us resting after flying for so long." Now this might be a little too much dialogue for a kid of age 3 to 6 to really get. We're going to say, "So am I to believe that every single one of you enjoys the noise this wren makes? I highly doubt that. I don't. And I don't think she should be allowed to sing at this pond. And I don't think she should be allowed to sing so loud." That tones it down a little bit. It makes it a little more simple for the children in question. And I think that they can understand and grasp the sentence a little better. I also think it will be easier on the parents who are reading this sentence to their children. You have to take into account that parents are going to be reading this to children at first before the kids are able to read it to themselves. And you want to make sure that it flows off the tongue well, enough that an average person can read it to their kid. So we don't want to have like a whole bunch of convoluted sentences with a bunch of grammatical things that people won't typically expect. The other birds looked at each other and the mammals all ducked their heads. Finally, one of the Beaver twins spoke up, her voice very soft and almost sorry. "I don't really like it," she said, trying not to look at Wrenbird. As she did. I'm going to take out as she did. It's not necessary. "Sometimes I would rather just be quiet." "Well, I like it," her twin said, his head bobbing up and down. "I think it makes things nicer here and much more friendly for our guests." Miss Chipmunk fidgeted with her hands. "I'm sorry, Wrenbird, but I don't always like it. I like it sometimes, but I think I'd like it more if you would ask us first." Then the migrating birds began to speak. One by one, and then all at once, they started telling Wrenbird what they thought. "I like it. It makes me feel like I can sing louder." "Well, I don't. I've just flown through a storm and have a terrible headache. I think it's very rude." "Which bird is it again that's known for their singing voice?" "I don't think it's wrens. Maybe you should leave it to the birds who are better at it." "I think you should sing louder. It's so nice to hear such a happy sound after such a long flight." "It's not the songs I like. I don't like ballads, and I certainly don't like arias. Sorry." "Didn't your mother ever teach you it's rude to sing over others? You're not very polite, and you don't seem very good at sharing." Wrenbird's body started becoming sick. Her heart beat really fast. Ooh, hey, I believe this was an automatic thing, but we are literally saying her heart beat. Her heart is the subject and beat is the verb. So her heart beat really fast, like putter, 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 putter. And her head felt swimmy and foggy and uncomfortable. Her eyes felt stingy and wet, and her throat got really tight. So much so that she could not speak up for herself or ask all the other forest creatures to stop saying things about her. So in this one, we want to emphasize that when kids are involved, you can use words that aren't correct. Things that aren't correct. You're basically trying to convey a feeling to them. You're trying to convey to them what Wren Bird is feeling. And that is her heart is going putter, 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 putter. And her head felt swimmy and foggy and uncomfortable. And her eyes felt stingy and wet. And her throat got really tight. But I am going to take out this second so, because I think that's something to stumble over. So much that she could not, and her throat got really tight, so much, her throat got really tight, so that she could not speak up for herself. And I'm going to delete this part because I think it makes the sentence way too long. At last the old bird huffed and turned back to her. Back to her, not look, that sounds better. See, you're rude and a bit of a nuisance. You need to go home. Wren Bird flapped her wings and flew faster than she had ever flown before, all the way home to her nest in the tree in the middle of the forest. That's a really long sentence. We're going to cut it up. When Wren Bird flapped her wings and flew faster than she had ever flown before, she flew over the pond, past the otter home, into the woods, and all the way, all the way to her nest in the very middle of the forest. I think that's a little better. It'll make some fun drawings for the illustrator, give them a little freedom to depict this in a way that they like best. Just saw this. And I think it makes more sense for a children's book. She flew over the pond. Wren Bird flapped her wings and flew faster than she had ever flown before. She flew over the pond, past the otter home, into the woods, and all the way to her nest in the middle of the forest. I'm not going to say very. When she got there, though, she still felt all those things in her body like before. She was afraid. She tried to stay in her nest in the big tree, but every time she saw another bird or forest creature, she became afraid all over again. It just wouldn't stop.